Hi, everyone. In order to set you up for listening and learning through this recorded video tonight, I wanted to share a few things to keep in mind as you listen, things that will help you to focus your attention, as well as some things that you will need in order to be prepared for our discussion together that will follow later. So, as you listen to this information about the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts, here are some suggestions of things that you might jot down. The first being, keep in mind what ideas are you having about why common standards are important? If you're already familiar with the Common Core standards in some way, what is something new that's coming up for you? What questions do you have after watching this? And what do you want to explore more? And then at one point tonight during this presentation, you'll be asked to trace a standard and the progression of it. So be prepared to share about the standard that you will trace and the progression of that standard. And then at the end, we're going to be thinking a little bit about our own reading lives and reflecting on those. So you'll want to be prepared to share those when we come together later as well. Tonight, you'll listen to me share some information about the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts. And I want to preface this by saying that this information is dry. It's very uninteresting to talk about the standards. However, it is essential. I know many teachers, scary as it is, in the classroom right now, some of whom have not really ever familiarized themselves with the standards, especially the ones for their own grade level. And this is a problem. If we don't know our grade level standards or the standards for the grade that comes before us or the one that comes after, how can we know if we're preparing students to move forward? While the standards don't tell us how to teach, they do tell us what to teach, and they're essential if we want to help students progress in a cumulative and sequential way to ensure that our students not only do not have any gaps in the opportunities that they're given in school, but also are prepared for junior high and high school and beyond. While we aren't going to become experts tonight in one specific grade level, hopefully you will walk away feeling more prepared to dive into the standards for your grade level when you do enter the classroom and have a greater understanding of how they're organized and how to read them. So with that in mind, tonight, first I'll share some background information about how the Common Core came to be. This week, you're also going to read chapter 1 in Allington's book, which will situate them in an even greater context for you. Then I'll share a bit about the different components of the standards, including the college and career readiness anchor standards and the corresponding grade level standards, and the relationship between the two components. Then we'll take a closer look at the grade level standards and the different strands within those standards in a very broad and general sense. We will look at how the standards for each grade level are written in their shorthand form and how to read them. And finally, we'll take a look at how the standards build upon one another in a progression from one grade level to the next, And this will set us up for our next discussion next week around reading research and what the research on reading indicates for us that students need. And we'll begin that discussion tonight and we will finish it next week. So the Common Core and the development of the Common Core state standards really began around the 1990s and early 2000s, back when each state actually had its own standards and definitions of proficiency for students. Clearly, this is a problem and can be problematic when different states have different things that they're teaching, different understandings of what is considered proficient. So kids graduate high school with varying educational experiences and opportunities. And you can see how this would pose a problem, especially for a child moving schools or moving to a new state. So, with that in mind, fast forward to 2007, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, so basically state leaders, began discussing this idea of common standards or standards that are common across the United States in order to support students in the US to be equipped for college and careers and to be positioned to compete globally. So then comes 2009, when the state school chiefs and governors began developing Common Core standards, and they were getting input from teachers and other experts in the fields. They developed drafts, which were reviewed by feedback groups along the way, which also included teachers and even parents. And they started by looking at what students needed to know by the time they graduated high school. And that's how they developed the college and career readiness standards first. And from there, the K 12 grade specific standards followed. So they almost like backwards mapped it. Then comes 2010, and that's when a draft was released for comments from the public. Then ultimately, the final version of the Common Core state standards came out that year as well. And then in 2011, states began adopting the Common Core state standards. So now here we are, 2020, and these standards have been around for about 10 years. But the number of states implementing Common Core has actually fluctuated a little bit between 2011 and the present. Some adopted it at first and have since decided not to use the Common Core anymore. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One of which is that some places really decided that they didn't want their standards dictated at a federal level. The standards are a bit controversial, and they've sparked a lot of debate and controversy over the years. And I'll share a few articles with you that you might choose to read if you want, that examine some of these counter narratives and perspectives so that you can understand the full spectrum of attitudes and beliefs about the standards. Either way, the state of California did adopt the Common Core state standards, and those are the standards that we use to guide what we teach. So we'll be taking a look at how they're organized and then look more closely at the English language arts standards specifically. So within the Common Core standards for English language arts, there are two complementary documents. There are the College and Career Readiness Anchor Standards, which is a mouthful. I might call them CCR from here on out, and the grade specific standards for K-12. The CCR and the grade specific standards are necessary complements. So the former, the CCR, provides broad standards, and the latter, the grade specific standards, provide additional specificity about those. And together they define the skills and understandings that all students must demonstrate. So standards for each grade level within kindergarten through 8th grade, but also for high school level, follow the College and Career Readiness Anchor Standards in each strand, and I'll talk more about the strands soon. Each grade-specific standards, as these standards are collectively called, corresponds to the same numbered CCR anchor standard. I know this sounds confusing, but put another way, each CCR anchor standard has an accompanying grade-specific standard translating that broader CCR statement into a grade-appropriate end-of-the-year expectation. So let me show you an example by pulling up the Common Core website. So if we look at the College and Career Readiness Anchor Standards for reading, you'll see that the first standard is key ideas and details. And there are 3 standards that accompany this. The first one says, read closely to determine what the text says explicitly and to make logical inferences from it. Cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text. Now, if we go look at the grade-specific standards for reading, let's say for 2nd grade, you'll see that the first standard is also key ideas and details. And the first standard says, ask and answer such questions as who, what, where, when, and why, and how to demonstrate understanding of key details in the text. This is supporting students in 2nd grade to be able to reach that larger overarching standard defined in the Common Core Readiness Anchor Standards. So as you can see now, hopefully, the 2 components of the Common Core complement one another, with the CCR anchor standards being the broader goals and the grade-specific standards being those specific skills that students must master at each grade level in order to ultimately reach those end-of-the-year goals. So now we'll take a little bit more of a close look at those different strands that I referred to within the College and Career Readiness Anchor Standards. There are 4 strands: reading, writing, speaking and listening, and language. The reading strand focuses on text complexity and the growth of comprehension. There's a big focus on comprehension here. These refer to both reading literature and reading informational texts, so both fiction and nonfiction reading. There's a far greater emphasis placed on informational reading than there ever has been with previous standards, by the way. The reading standards place equal emphasis on the sophistication of what students read and the skill with which they read. Whatever they're reading, students must show a steadily growing ability to discern more from and make fuller use of the text that they're reading, including making an increasing number of connections among ideas and between texts, considering a wider range of evidence, and becoming more sensitive to those inconsistencies, ambiguities, and poor reasoning in texts. These are lofty goals, I must say. The next strand is the writing anchor standards. These include standards that refer to the different text types that students are expected to write, how they respond to reading, as well as research. So, in general, this strand emphasizes the fact that students need to learn to use writing as a way of offering and supporting opinions, demonstrating understanding of the subjects they're studying, and conveying real and imagined experiences and events. So basically, they learn to appreciate that a key purpose of writing is to communicate clearly. These skills point towards the three types of writing that students are expected to learn: informational or explanatory writing, opinion or persuasive writing, and narrative writing, which could be either real or imaginative. The standards also point towards the fact that students need greater writing skills that span across all of these text types. So that includes the ability to plan, revise, edit, and publish. They need experiences with the writing process. The writing strand also includes standards that stress the importance of the writing about reading and the reading-writing connection. By requiring students to write about evidence from both literary and informational texts, again, fiction and nonfiction. There are also research standards that are prominently included in this strand. The writing standards allude to a need for daily writing in which students write clearly across the curriculum for a variety of audiences and purposes. So, in order to meet these goals, students really have to devote a pretty significant amount of time and effort to writing, producing numerous pieces over a short as well as an extended period of time throughout the entire school year. And it's extremely exciting that writing is emphasized as much as it is in the Common Core standards, as this was not the case prior to these standards. It finally has a place at the table as an equal with reading, as it should. The next strand includes the speaking and listening anchor standards, which aim to really develop students who are flexible communicators as well as collaborators. The speaking and listening standards require that students are able to develop a range of broadly useful oral communication as well as interpersonal skills. Students have to learn to work together, express and listen carefully to ideas, integrate information from oral and visual and quantitative, as well as other media sources, evaluate what they're hearing, and then use media and visual displays strategically in order to help them communicate a message, and then also adapt their speech to different contexts. Finally, there's the language strand, which includes the standards related to conventions, the effective use of them, as well as vocabulary. Essentially, the language standards include the essential rules of standard written and spoken English, including grammar, usage, and mechanics. The vocabulary standards focus on understanding words and phrases, their relationships, and the subtle nuances, as well as on acquiring new vocabulary, especially generic academic, as well as domain-specific words and phrases. And the inclusion of the language standards in their own strand should not be taken as any indication that these skills related to conventions are unimportant to reading, writing, speaking, or listening, because really they are inseparable from all of those contexts. They just needed to be explicitly called out. So the Common Core Readiness Anchor Standards provide us with the broad standards, while the grade-specific standards really break it down with specificity by grade level, what children should be able to do by the end of the year at each grade level. And the grade-specific standards fall into those same categories as the strands that we just looked at: reading, writing, speaking and listening, and language. However, in the grade-specific standards, reading is also broken down even further into 3 sections: literature, informational text, and foundational skills. Literature and informational text refer to the expectations within different types of reading, fiction and nonfiction. In K1, foundational skills includes concepts of print and phonological awareness standards, as well as phonics and word recognition and fluency. In grades 2 and up, there are only standards within that foundational skill area for phonics and word recognition and fluency. These foundational skills are essentially the phonics, print work, and fluency, while the literature and informational text standards are more comprehension based. Very broadly speaking now, these standards include developing skills in the following areas. Of course, these are very broad categories with the rigor and complexity in each of these building from kinder through 6th grade. So within the grade specific standards for reading literature, some of the different things that these standards include are thinking about characters in texts, thinking about setting in the text, retelling or summarizing those key events, citing evidence from the text, uncovering themes in the text, determining the meaning of unknown words, comparing different types of literature, thinking about and noticing the point of view or the narrator, comparing themes and ideas across texts. And these also include reading from stories, dramas, and poetry at grade level. Within the reading informational text grade specific standards, some of the standards include things like figuring out the main idea and key details in a text or in part of a text, asking questions and then being able to cite evidence or providing quotations directly from the text, describing the relationships between ideas in a text and then connections between the images of the text. So relationships between the words and the pictures. Determining the meaning of unknown words, using text features to locate information, readers versus the author's point of view, comparing and or integrating main ideas across texts on the same topic, noticing different types of text structures in information books, which can include compare-contrast text structure, a chronological text structure, cause-effect, or problem solution, and finally, reading informational texts at grade level. Within the reading foundational skill standards, these standards include things like concepts of print for kindergarten and 1st grade, phonological awareness for kindergarten and 1st grade as well, all of those phonics skills and word analysis skills, which could include sound spelling correspondences, letter sounds, decoding words with 2 syllables, inflected endings. All of that will depend upon the grade level with which you're looking at. Word recognition, recognizing irregularly spelled words, and finally, fluency, which includes reading with purpose and understanding, accuracy, rate, expression, and thinking about the larger context of the book that you're reading when you're solving words. The grade level standards for writing include standards for opinion writing, informative or informational writing, as well as narrative writing. And then the specific standards per grade level really grow from one to the next, and there are substandards for each of those different text types. There are also standards that allude to the writing process, which includes revising, planning, editing, publishing, and also even publishing with a variety of digital tools. There are also standards that support students to be able to research and take notes, as well as cite sources. There are standards that refer to the skills of writing literary essays and using evidence from the text to support claims. And then there are standards, like I mentioned before when talking about the strands, that allude to the fact that kids really need to be writing routinely for a variety of different purposes, which is really alluding to the writing process, which we'll talk a lot more about in our next course. As far as the speaking and listening standards are concerned, these are just a variety of some of the skills that students are expected to be able to do within these speaking and listening standards. One being engaging in collaborative discussions, being able to build upon the ideas of others, paraphrasing in order to determine the main ideas from texts read aloud or information presented to students, being able to ask and answer questions, being able to report on a topic or tell a story while also speaking clearly with an appropriate pace. These standards also include adding audio or visual information to presentations in order to convey information, being able to speak in complete sentences, and then being able to adapt speech to various contexts, including different types of social contexts. And finally, we have the language standards. So again, these are really referring to those conventions of standard English, which could include printing letters, grammar and usage, capitalization rules, punctuation rules, and spelling. That's where these standards live. These standards for language also include those vocabulary standards, determining the meaning of unknown words and all the strategies for doing so, word relationships, shades of meaning, using new words or phrases acquired. And then also, these standards include being able to consult reference materials like dictionaries and a thesaurus. So now, when reading the standards, the first part of the standard will tell you whether it is a math or ELA standard. Then it will tell you the strand: reading literature, reading information, reading foundational skills, writing, speaking or listening, or language. And then the next number will tell you the grade level, followed by the standard number, which, as a reminder, matches those overarching standards from the college and career readiness standards as well. So let's take a look at these examples. In the first example you see, it's clearly an English language arts standard, denoted by ELA, and it's from the reading information strand, denoted by RI, for kindergarten. There's a K, and it is the first standard, that one at the end. And the next example is also an ELA standard. You can tell because there's an ELA right there. It is from the writing strand, denoted by a W, and it is a fourth grade standard because there's a 4, and then it is the first standard. Sometimes it's important to know that you will find letters after that final number, like A, B, C, etc., which indicate substandards. So these standards fall under the larger overarching standard that you see above them that matches those anchor standards, but given more specifics about what children should be able to do at the end of the grade level. So for example, in this example from the reading foundational skills for second grade, third standard, there are multiple substandards denoted by the A, B, or C that follow. So the standard is that students will be able to apply grade level phonics and word analysis skills in decoding words. And then those substandards outline what those grade level phonics and word analysis skills actually are for second grade. So it gives some specifics. All right, so now you're gonna have a chance to try. Can you look at these standards on the right-hand side of the slide and figure out what these standards are? So I'll give you a minute to give it a guess. You could think about it just in your mind. You could jot it down. And feel free to pause the video. And when you're ready to come back, you can press play. All right, give it a try. All right, so the first one is a speaking and listening standard from 5th grade, and it is the second standard. The second one is a reading literature standard from 1st grade, and it is standard number 7. Pretty simple, but important to give it a try yourself. So now that we know how to read the standards and the different strands, let's look a little bit closer at some of those standards. It's important to note that the strands build from one grade to the next. That's how these standards were created. Remember, first by thinking about what students need to know in order to be ready for college and career, and then backwards mapping, how would that need to build in a progression beginning in kindergarten? So for most of the standards, you can follow the progression from kindergarten all the way through 6th grade and see how they build upon one another. While this is not true for all standards, as some are present only in some grade levels and then no longer apply for others, for example, those phonological awareness standards end in 1st grade. Let's look at this example from reading literature. So in kindergarten, this work begins by being able to know what the word character means, and then identifying who the characters are in a story, as well as the setting and major events. All right, that same standard from reading literature, now in first grade, students then learn to describe characters, describe the settings, and describe the events by using details from the text. So you can already see how that standard has been built upon when moving from kindergarten to first grade. Not only are they just identifying the character setting and major events, but now they're describing those character setting and events by using details from the text. Now moving on to second grade, students are expected to describe how the characters are impacted by challenges that they face or events in the story. So you can see how it's essential to have those kindergarten and first grade standards down before being able to do this work in second grade. By third grade, they are expected to describe a character in depth, their traits, what motivates them, and their feelings, and then connect their actions, the character's actions, to events in the story. It's getting more and more complex, isn't it? Okay, so now in fourth grade, students are expected to describe the characters, setting, and events by using evidence from the text, including a character's thoughts, words, or actions. Let's keep going. Now in fifth grade, it continues to build. This same standard, students are expected to be able to compare two or more characters, settings, or events, again, using evidence from the text, a theme in a lot of the reading standards you'll notice, which could be done by noticing how characters act with one another. Okay, so now it's not only one character, setting, or event, it's grown to comparing and contrasting two or more, and noticing how characters interact with one another. There's a lot of inferring happening here. Now, finally, in sixth grade, this same standard, students should be able to describe how a story plot unfolds and how the characters respond or change as the plot moves forward. So you can see, hopefully, by looking at this one standard from K through sixth grade, like this reading literature standard, it builds from one grade level to the next. And if students aren't able to master the standard at their grade level, it will be very difficult for them to master the same standard at the next grade level, because they really build upon one another in such a way that the work of one precedes the next. All right, so now you are going to have a chance to try this work of tracing a standard. So here are the steps for you to do this. First, you're going to use the QR code on the left side of this screen to open the Common Core website. So in order to do that, you're just going to open up your phone. You're going to go to the phone camera. You're going to hold the camera up to the QR code, which will scan it or read it, and a link will pop up at the top of the screen, and you just click on that link. Once you get there, find the standards along the right-hand side. Pick a standard. First of all, pick a grade level, any grade level, K6, then pick a standard. I advise you don't pick concepts of print or phonological awareness within those reading foundational skills because they don't span all the way up to sixth grade. And then trace that standard from kindergarten through grade 6. And as you do so, what do you notice? And jot down your observations and be prepared to share later when we come together. All right, so go ahead and pause this video while you do that work, and I'll see you here when you come back. All right, welcome back. So now that we've taken some time to understand the standards, the roadmap really for what our children are expected to learn at each grade level, it's important to remember that these standards don't tell us how to teach. We have to rely on reading research to decide the best way to help our students actually reach these goals. So with that in mind, we're going to take a look at reading research, not tonight, but next week, and what it says about how kids learn to read. By understanding the standards and understanding what the research says about teaching reading effectively, we can be positioned to be effective teachers of reading, using those standards that we just looked at as a guide and the research almost as our North Star. But before we begin talking about reading research next week, I want us to take a moment to reflect on our own reading lives, our own lives as readers. So before we come together to meet, you're going to take some time and write the answers to these questions. Jot them down somewhere and be prepared to share. So the first question I want you to think about when you reflect on your reading life, either as a child, as an adolescent, or even as an adult, when was reading the best for you and what made it the best? And then I want you to also think about when was reading the worst and what was it specifically that made it so dreadful? So go ahead and stop this video, jot your ideas down to share with the group when we come together for a discussion. Thank you for listening, and I will see you all very soon to debrief and discuss this new learning and your reflections. Bye.